Good morning, folks. This is Tracy Blackburn with Platform 3 Solutions, along with our team and partner from OpenText. We're getting geared up here for our presentation on zombie applications and how to eradicate them from your data center. This morning we have a couple of guest speakers. We have Karka and Kevin from Platform 3 Solutions. They'll be introducing themselves shortly. Karka is Chief Technology Officer from Platform 3, and Kevin is one of our senior consultants on team. Both Karka and Kevin bring a long background of establishing program offices to run enterprise archive and application decommissioning, along with several other capabilities in that area. We want to keep things running on a tight schedule today out of respect for your time. We appreciate everybody joining the call. We will have a few polling questions during the webinar today, so take advantage of those polling questions so you can provide us feedback. So again, today, the purpose of the webinar is to talk about zombie applications that are infiltrating your data center and what to do about them. This is something that we see going on in every organization. We want to discuss how we got here, what it's keeping us from doing next. What are these zombie applications preventing us from doing in terms of either meeting compliance or legal requirements, or even a lot of the innovation in the initiatives that organizations have, throughout the world today. What can you do about it? How can you eradicate the zombie infestation from your data center? Where to start, and have the opportunity for follow-up to see this in action. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Karka.
Hello all, this is Karka. I'm the CTO with Platform 3 Solutions. I've been a part of some pretty large decommissioning efforts to consolidate data centers, and have over 15 years of experience dealing with portfolio rationalization. And I'm here to talk today about zombie infestations on data centers. By the way, happy Halloween, everyone. So we'll start off by talking about what's happening in every organization. So in a typical portfolio, we start by looking at how a typical portfolio looks like, right? You have your young applications. Of course, there are vendors knocking on your doors, having you add new applications to your portfolio, bringing in new functions, and then you also have to compete with your competitive organizations, making sure that as a technology capability, you have everything you need so that your business runs without issues. So these are your new applications. And then once they're brought in, once they're validated, once you go through your pilot phase, they become young applications that are still not fully used, that are young, that just start being a part of your organization, that hasn't been fully integrated. And then you move on to your adolescent stage, where you start integrating, you start making it as a part of your organization's portfolio, where it starts contributing to your daily business functions. And then it gets into the most productive phase, which is where it's in its prime. Gives you its full capability, it's fully functional, and then you have it using maximum intent with minimal effort to maintain the systems. So in a typical portfolio, right, you need to have a lot of applications in your prime status, a status where the applications are at its most healthy phase, where they are most technologically relevant, where maintaining them is a piece of cake. And then you also have your mature applications, which are not technologically far and which are still very relevant, which contributes a lot to your business function. But what happens after the applications are mature? Well, we assume that the application goes to a crazy good heaven, where they get dropped off and where they can just take a place, right? But now we'll go on and look at how portfolio actually looks like in any organization. So you, instead of having a small inflow of incoming application, you have a large influx of application. Again, the needs driven partly by business, partly by mergers, acquisitions, where new technologies are brought in, partly because there are vendors who expose you to new and relevant technology that constantly makes you acquire more applications, more technologies that lets you build newer applications. So you have a huge stack of new applications. followed by your typical young adolescent and prime applications, which kind of are the same size as what you would see in a balanced portfolio. But then you have your mature applications. Yeah, so in any typical organizations, the mature application actually is bigger than applications that are in prime. Still not a big point of concern because you can still maintain your mature applications. They're a little outdated technology, but you can still find staff that can help you with maintenance. It's still relevant, so you can work with them. But then the next part is where it gets crazy, right? You have your senile applications. What happens here? The application gets out of date. It doesn't fully serve your business function. It's still mature. There are still a lot of people who think it should exist, but it's at that point where you don't know if you really need it. But then there is one more phase of applications that people don't usually see. That's the zombie stage of applications. So here what happens is the application don't derive any actual meaningful function. They exist in your organization. They take up a lot of your cost in maintaining them, and they are the ones that actually create the distorted portfolio. So you see what the typical distorted portfolio is. So we have a quick questionnaire here. Do you think you have technologies in your data center that should be retired? Wow.
A lot of maybes, quite a few absolutes, and some folks that are not sure. You know, for the folks that are not sure, that's not that uncommon of an answer, because we often find that there are lots of applications and lots of information that's available to line of business applications, but some of the applications are so old that people have lost track of them. So there is a certain amount of uncertainty of what exists. And this is where, and we'll talk about this as we go forward in terms of the application, overall application portfolio sort of analysis. So I think we can go on from there.
Fantastic. You know, actually, maybe is kind of the best answer you can get, mainly because you're not sure, which is probably the biggest reason why these zombie applications exist itself. Going forward, the challenges facing IT. In a typical IT organizations, the most three the common challenges are rising costs, outdated systems, and compliance. One feeds the other. Rising cost creates outdated systems. Outdated systems increase the cost, and compliance is everywhere. Compliance is the reason why you have to spend more to keep up applications in compliance, to add more security, to keep them more stable, to add everything. Rising cost. Why do we have rising cost in IT infrastructure or IT maintenance? The rising cost of licenses, the storage and backup cost, the more and more backups you have to take, the more and more you're worried about the application. You have to bring in HA, high availability, new backup strategies, the infrastructure cost that you invest in. When applications stop being maintained by product vendors, when they stop going out of support, you have to invest in specialized infrastructure, specialized support guarantees to make sure that your application continues to run, and then the specialized staff. So that is probably the biggest reason that gets hidden the most. And then where do we have outdated systems? Outdated systems mainly come in because they are externally introduced. Like when you're going through a cloud migration strategy, you have to leave out certain applications that are not a fit for cloud. Then the most common reason is mergers and acquisitions. So you start, as an organization goes, they start acquiring new organizations, smaller ones, and then there are big mergers that go in where there is a duplication of technology, where you have two similar applications performing the same functions, and then IT architects choose the one that's more relevant, that's more scalable, and the other application doesn't really go away. It still exists, it still runs for some of the functions, and then these systems get outdated. They don't get maintained because they don't serve its full function, but they still are in there, and they create outdated systems. Then end of life exposure. Organizations still have applications that have been out of support for the last 15 years, 20 years that I have seen. And then all the other reasons listed here. These are reasons why outdated systems are still in place, are still being run, and still maintained in an IT organizations. The next part is compliance. Compliance has a very big impact in an IT organization. Compliance, like laws like GDPR and CCPA, have had a huge impact on driving the cost of what an IT organization spends on managing its systems. There are outdated systems that needs to be still compliant. We have PHI and PII information that needs to be maintained. So one of the common things that we talk about is, hey, all these legacy systems, they still hold PII information. They still are in compliance with GDPR. How do you maintain that? So you have to build in specialized solution where you cannot get products out of the box to fit it. And they are not fit for retention management too. So your organization legally needs to only hold 15 years of data. But what happens actually is that because of these legacy systems, you end up holding data longer than it's needed, thereby exposing yourself to the risk of litigations and lawsuits. These are huge challenges that we currently face with compliance in IT organizations. These are a couple of interesting facts from Gartner and Forrester. The one that really gets me excited is that 72% of the budget goes on to keep the lights on function to applications that are just there because organizations don't know what to do with them. They are the biggest chunk of your IT maintenance cost, mainly because you have to have data centers running to maintain these systems. You have to have specialized staff. You have to do everything extra to what is actually required to manage applications. These are some very, very interesting facts that we are seeing.
And we've got another poll question. Yeah, we're pulling up another poll question here. So
fantastic.
I would say if you have email systems like Lotus Notes or CC Mail, that it is probably pretty scary. Folks will decommission Lotus as an email system, and they'll find that they have still a lot of applications that are running on Notes, and they need to maintain those applications for compliance reasons or to run the business because they contain customer or business critical information. But yeah, please let us know about where you see some of your legacy applications in the ecosystem.
As usual, it's the AS400.
Yeah, and still lots of network shares as well, which those are pretty spooky. And it's good to see that maybe there's not so much Lotus Notes out there, but there is some.
Yeah, see, what's very interesting for me is that everybody has AS400. AS400s were built, and this is one of the statistics I found somewhere, that there are still about 150,000 active instances of AS400 that are still running, and they are all either VSAMs or ISAMs. They're not even in a DB2 database, and that's very scary because with the current governance and laws, just trying to find out where your PHI and PII data is in there, it's a very risky thing. And maintaining these systems and paying those huge maintenance costs just is a very scary thing. So why is this happening? Why is all this happening? The recent requirements on retention, the recent requirements on compliance from government bodies is a big driver for us to identify these legacy systems, because they have a huge impact on what data you can keep and how you can maintain it and how the data is going to be made available to your customers. The second reason, the big reason, is the cost. People don't see the cost of why these applications should exist. They only look at, oh, okay, if I go ahead, take this out, I will lose my application context. This exists for this one tiny function, so I might have to keep it. And then over the period of time, when you go through mergers, acquisitions, or when people just retire, right? So your SMEs no longer exist, and then a typically mature application becomes a zombie application. So these are all reasons why this actually happens. So this is a slide I love. What you cannot do. And so every time we usually actually ask a question here, like, what do you think you should do? And these are options that get chosen the most, right? Hey, can I just back up my data and throw away the system? You cannot do that. You can ask me why, and I'm hoping somebody will. So I'll just answer the question. So why cannot you throw the system away and just back up the data? You cannot do it because you lose business context. There is no way you can meaningfully refer the data. If you're trying to archive a legacy application, if you're trying to take GBs of data, just back it up and then throw the system away. There are two ways you can do it, like take a backup of the entire system, in which case to actually restore the backup, you need that exact same infrastructure, which is most likely not going to be available 3-5 years down the line, which makes it very risky from a compliance standpoint. The other thing is, if you just get all the data out and back it away, there is no way you can meaningfully pull information from that, which again is a huge compliance risk. The other option is, can I just turn the whole thing off and put it in a warehouse, which is again a big, you cannot do. for a couple of reasons. Turning that on when you need it is probably never going to happen. But if you ever actually need to bring the system back on, and if it doesn't turn back on, that puts us in a very sticky spot. The second point is the data there still needs to be maintained. You only need to keep data that you need. If you still, even if you switch it off, the data is there, and there is data that you supposedly are not supposed to have, and that's a huge risk. And this is the most relevant thing, right? Act like it doesn't exist, which is what a lot of organizations are doing now. Act like it doesn't exist until it becomes a major problem to me. Again, it's a valid thing to do until you have some issues.
All right,
another
now
question.
to the poll.
What do you think keeps older systems running in your organization? Very good answers here.
Looks like it's leveled out. Maybe we'll go ahead and, some.
Not a priority of senior management. That's something that always happens. So the final root causes. Why do we have these zombie applications? The big reason is mergers and acquisitions again, because it creates duplicate functional systems that sits on your portfolio that serves the exact same function, that are pretty much at the same health, and you have to choose to keep one. Whereas for political reasons or for technology reasons, you keep the other as well to serve some tiny function. And that usually creates the zombie application. Migration to cloud is another big reason. There are applications that cannot be migrated because they don't really serve a purpose in the cloud. There are more newer systems that can take that load, and then the system just sits there and becomes a zombie application. Upgrading a large system to a new version and all the important data cannot be moved. So they only, when you migrate like to a new SAP system, you only migrate the last 2 years data. You leave the other data in the old system and then just keep it running so that you can pull reports. But then that old SAP system will start costing you more in terms of maintenance than the newer system now you have on HANA or whatever cloud system you want. Another reason that we have seen is data center consolidation. Data center consolidation actually serves a huge benefit, right? It lets you reduce your organizational footprint, but still it comes at a cost where you'll have to take these legacy applications, either decommission it or just migrate it. And when it gets migrated, it stops being functional, but it still is there and still gets maintained.
Okay, so how has your organization done any mergers, acquisitions that cause fragmented data processing and duplicate systems to exist? We'll run that poll for just a minute. That one's probably going to come in pretty quickly. All right, I think we can probably lock that in. Yeah, I think it's the most large organizations we find some level of mergers and acquisitions. Other companies at the top end of the spectrum we often find are what we might call serial acquirers that are continually acquiring other companies just as part of their growth strategy.
So guys, we've been talking about the problem for a while. There are zombie applications, there are scary applications. How do you get rid of them? How do you actually work on these? So OpenText and Platform 3 together have built InfoArchive and Archon that helps you decommission, archive, and safely retain only the data you need to retain, and reduce your operational spending on these zombie applications. So to talk about these applications a little bit, so InfoArchive is the storage container. It's an XML based system repository that manages both structured and unstructured information. It's very compliant. It brings in chain of custody. It has efficient administration of data. It can manage any of the legacy data. It comes with fast indexing and searching. It's very low cost storage. It has full data retention capabilities, and it's a very simple way of storing information and then accessing information at a later point in time with compliance, while the data is protected and retained only for the period it needs to be retained. So for example, you take data from an AS400 system, you archive it with InfoArchive. You can set retention policy depending on the data type or the data record to say, hey, this data gets in for 15, this is financial information, so it stays in for 30. And then you can set in a process where you can actually review and delete, or you can automatically let the system purge information once its retention period is complete. So the data is managed, it's safely held, and then it gets deleted at the end of life cycle. The other product here is Archon. So how the data gets in from the legacy system onto the archive, the InfoArchive system. So that's through Archon. So Archon What it does is it has the ability to connect with almost any legacy system. It has the ability to understand legacy systems. So one of the big things that I hear when we work through a portfolio rationalization is, hey, I have all these legacy systems, but I have nobody who knows what these systems are. Nobody who knows how the data is internally connected. So if you are going to archive this information, how can I ensure referential integrity? How can I make sure that the data is actually intact? And how can I make sure that I can still query the data? How can I pull reports out after you archive the information? So this referential integrity, this way of connecting data and keeping them together has been a big challenge that we wanted to solve. So what we do is use metalytics, or what we call as metalizer, do relationship analysis. So in an automated way, we can log into any legacy application, understand all the relationships, build the relationships, actually use our inbuilt inherent tools within the metalizer to basically understand any relationship, any data that gets connected. We can even crawl the information to get through that, but we basically build a complete metadata of all the data and how all the data is connected. And then not just the data, but also all the relationship information, all the chain of custody information, everything gets transported into the archive, and then it gets safely held there for its retention period. Archon facilitates the whole thing, and the big advantage here is the metalytics, which means that you're not just extracting data, you're also extracting information about the data. So Archon lets you extract all this data in different ways. It's directly integrated with InfoArchive, so all the data gets automatically ingested into InfoArchive, and then it lets you easily, through drag and drop, build your own screen. So that's what we call as the query generation screen. So through it all, what Archon does is it automates the whole process of archiving and decommissioning. And again, it's really cool because it's built for legacy applications. It's built to understand data, so that you have very minimal requirements from, or very minimal need of an SME, and it's built to automate and make the whole process faster. We are going through a case study of global bank. So this is somebody who is currently using InfoArchive and Archon, and they are actually going through their entire portfolio, through all of their applications, to not just archive data from their zombie applications, to not just decommission information, but also to keep their mature applications, to keep their running applications safe and stop them from becoming senile or zombie. So what we are doing is not just archiving data from really legacy system, but we are also building connectors to all their production systems so that we keep them lean and mean. For an organization this big, they have literally terabytes of data coming in every day, and they want to make sure that they don't invest too much in infrastructure. So what we are able to do is identify non-operational data. So you have your transactional data, non-operational data, and your operational data sitting in any database. So we are able to identify and pull information that's not been used for a long period, and then archive that in addition to all the old systems, thereby creating a lean and perfect portfolio where your organization, where all your applications come between, the mature and the adult categories.
Okay, how much time do you think is wasted in your organization on zombie, or how much money rather is wasted on zombie applications? We see a wide range here depending on the size of the company and how many legacy applications they have. Looks like we're coming in.
Wow. There are a couple of billions. That's interesting.
Yeah, we actually saw one customer in the healthcare space. I think they reported their numbers. They reported that using a combination of these tools is to establish program office, that they, again, their numbers, not ours, they cut costs by about $900 million in the first 3 years. They were a serial acquirer for sure. The cost savings that can be redirected to business innovation, to work to compete against market innovators can be significant.
So hi, my name is Kevin Navin, and I've been in the decommission space, managing and working in decommission programs for about a decade now. So what that's kind of allowed me to do is really help create a framework and best practices around the overall decommissioning program strategy. So while we've talked about some of the impacts that zombie applications have within organizations, as far as the costs and maintenance and the risk, especially when you get into unsupported or applications that pose security risk. I'm going to focus a little bit more on execution. So what's the best way or the best solution to successfully implement decommissioning within your enterprise? First, let me start by saying why organizations aren't very good at decommissioning, and I've just picked a few things. There's several reasons why they're not really effective at it, but one of the reasons is that IT organizations' core competency is really to build and deploy, and they're very good at it. With some of the technologies as like infrastructure as code and containers, that is really something that they excel at. Decommissioning is a little bit different because you're not deconstructing and decommissioning things that are being built through your service catalogs or your automation. You're going back quite a few years in some cases to try and figure out how to decommission the application, its components, and its underlying infrastructure. So again, the current IT staff is not very proficient at that. Also, decommissioning is often deprioritized within an organization. So if you can imagine a data center resource sitting there with 10 or 20 servers to pull from racks versus installing 10 or 20 servers and storage for a very strategic capital initiative, that capital initiative is always going to win out. And decommission gets pushed back once, twice, 3 times, and then really falls to the bottom of the list. So that's another reason. And even when organizations do perform decommissioning work, it's often not done very successfully. It's very fragmented, and individuals that are slated with doing decommission activities tend to really focus on what they need to do relative to their role or function in the organization. And they've been involved in hundreds, if not thousands, of decommissions over the last decade. And there's a couple examples that we've run into. Is one application business rolled out a new application, and their goal was that once they went live is to not let anyone log into the old system. That was very prudent thing to do. But obviously, once they removed permissions, the entire infrastructure remains. So that just sat out there idle, costing the organization money. But in the business's mind, they accomplished, that was their definition of decommissioning. We had another couple of instances where an organization was faced with third-party license invoices. So they were being billed for the use of the application, and they wanted that to cease. They wanted to stop those bills coming in. So as part of the agreement with the vendor, all they had to do was remove the production instance. Well, they did that, leaving the rest of the environment still standing, and the connectivity and all the other associated components. So you get that a lot because the fragmented nature of decommissions that happen with IT, they're not very holistic in their approach of capturing requirements and executing to a specific set of tasks and completion. In creating, one of the things, if you formalize your decommissioning within the enterprise, you really do drive a lot of benefits back to the organization. Mainly, you get to let the IT folks focus on their core competencies. You would typically, in an enterprise decommission program or a center of excellence, you would have your own dedicated resources that would actually become very expert in the decommissioning process. They would understand the requirements, they would have the blueprints, the templates, the framework, if you will, to actually execute decommissions wholly and successfully. So that's a great value of focusing, bringing in an enterprise decommission program to operate decommissions within your organization. So this then ensures that you're not going to have any of the remnants or the orphan components, so that they're not going to linger on for years and people not knowing what these items were used for, when they were used. So those are some of the key benefits of an enterprise program. In establishing an enterprise decommission program, it's essential that there's a common framework or the best practices within that. And one of the keys with establishing an enterprise decommission framework is it allows you to actually execute many decommissioning activities. While we talked a little bit about portfolio management, application rationalizations, those indeed would be the majority of the intake, or the top of the funnel, if you will, for an enterprise program to function. However, if you put the right framework in, you can accommodate many other decommission activities that are going on within the organization. They can really become that center of excellence that's very expert in executing decommission related activities. So within an organization, you can have many different activities that require decommissioning. So we talked a little bit about data center consolidation. There's decommission involved in that. You've got tech refreshes. You're going to the latest version of Oracle. Well, what are you going to do with the old Oracle versions? And you have site closures, and you have all these activities that go on within an organization that an enterprise framework can help facilitate and capture and report back to management. So it's really essential that you create a comprehensive framework that's able to not only manage but execute all the different decommission activities that are a result of just normal operations within an enterprise. So when we talk about some of the benefits of the framework, by establishing a framework within the program, the key thing is you've got this overall governance. So you've got your best practices, you've got your clearinghouse, if you will, that application teams, business units, various entities within the organization can lean on to help them complete successfully the decommission. So whether the decommission is something that has to come through and have, as Karka was talking about, the data retention, the archival, you have the ability to do that. You have the ability to just handle the other more technical aspects, such as technology refreshes and being able to adequately work hand in hand with the build and deploy teams to ensure that the overall scope of those activities are accomplished. And then you have all the way down through the deconstruction, you have that ability to have oversight and involvement and governance over the appropriate removal of assets, the destruction of assets, the shredding of drives, making sure that the data compliance is handled in those manners as well. So an enterprise decommission framework is that single point that can handle anything within the enterprise decommission related. And one of the reasons that providing it on an enterprise level is so effective, and I can speak from experience at how effective it is that in most organizations, they're very fragmented. So you have one group doing some particular aspect of decommission, let's say the data center folks, and you have another group doing it from, let's say, the servers or storage removal and things of that nature. And then you might even have a real estate group involved, and they're not very apprised of all the other interrelated activities. So what the enterprise decommission framework does is it kind of brings that all together. And what's important for the business as well is that the enterprise program can also assist in the proper intake, triaging, and more importantly, the prioritization of the decommissioning work that has to happen, because not all application decommissions are created equal. So it's the enterprise decommission program, and within that framework, the prioritization is what allows the organization to recoup the most amount of dollars in the shortest amount of time. And so that's one of the other key benefits of having this enterprise sort of view of decommissioning. One example highlighted there below is that one of the clients that I worked with in 2018, they removed $100 million of business costs for IT services in 2018. So in essence, what that means is some portion of that, and Tracy alluded to this previously, is that some portion of that cost savings, they can now roll into innovation, new systems, things that can drive business value back to the organization by, relieving themselves of that large amount of cost savings relative to the zombie applications or the unneeded applications and infrastructure that's related to that.
So thanks, Kevin. And just tagging on your comment there with funding innovation, not only do you have the opportunity to self-fund innovation through cost savings related to application decommissioning, but of course, simplify the integration stack, which shortens your time to value, as well as your overall cost of ownership. So, again, we talked about the typical distorted portfolio, and hopefully you saw very familiar cartoon or a comic book character that we're actually renaming as the application undertaker, who has successfully eradicated the zombie applications, oh, there he goes, from your data center, and helped you to normalize your portfolio, save quite a bit of money, in the overall operational costs. Again, referring back to IDC's survey, I think it was 3,500 or so IT organizations that were spending 72% of their IT budget just to keep the lights on with these legacy applications, and then move towards a compliant enterprise archive and actually establish a program office around that. We've concluded the presentation here. We thank you very much for your time. Let's go to the next slide. And in terms of next steps, ways that you can engage us, let us know if you'd like to see a demonstration in action. We can set up and perform a demonstration of the solution in 15 minutes or 30 minutes or however deep you'd like to go. Call us and talk to us about the applications that are plaguing your data center. Let's talk about how we can engage to help you understand what some of the zombie applications are in your data center and build a roadmap and a plan of attack to decommission those applications, understand what they are, prioritize and stack rank them based on the importance to the organization and the cost associated with, or the cost savings associated with decommissioning those applications. So that concludes today's presentation. Again, we appreciate and thank you for your time and look forward to speaking with anybody who's interested in follow-up in the future. That concludes our webinar. Thank you.